He thought the waitress had ruined his $8,000 suit on purpose, but 3 seconds later, Ethan Kong realized she had just saved his life. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the Avalon rooftop like handfuls of thrown gravel, turning Manhattan into a blur of silver lights and distorted shadows 62 floors below. Inside, everything glowed gold. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Jazz hummed softly through hidden speakers. Men in tailored suits spoke in low voices over aged whiskey and imported steaks while women draped in diamonds laughed beneath candlelight that made everyone look richer than they really were. Naomi Brooks moved silently between tables balancing a tray of champagne flutes against one palm, her black uniform pressed perfectly despite the 12-hour shift already weighing on her shoulders. She had learned long ago that invisibility paid better than attention. Invisible people kept their jobs. Invisible people survived. Table 12 needs another bottle, Marco muttered as he brushed past her near the service station. And don't mess this one up. VIP client. Naomi glanced toward the private section near the floor-to-ceiling windows and immediately felt the atmosphere shift. 3 men stood near the entrance with coiled earpieces hidden beneath their collars, scanning every movement inside the restaurant without appearing to move at all. Security. Serious security. At the center table sat Ethan Kong. Even before Naomi recognized his face from the whispered conversations she'd overheard in the kitchen for months, she recognized power when she saw it. It wasn't the charcoal Brioni suit fitted perfectly across his broad shoulders or the platinum watch peeking beneath his cuff. It was the stillness. Everyone else in the restaurant moved. Ethan Kong didn't. He sat with one hand resting near his untouched whiskey glass, dark eyes calmly observing the room as if he already knew how every conversation would end before anyone spoke. Rainwater crawled slowly down the glass behind him, turning the city lights into rivers of color. Naomi grabbed the Bordeaux from the service counter and started toward table 12. Halfway. There, something prickled at the back of her neck. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Her eyes drifted toward the neighboring high-rise across the avenue. 37 floors up, behind a darkened office window, she saw it. A brief silver flicker. Small. Sharp. Gone in less than a second. Naomi froze mid-step. Her stomach tightened instantly. Scope reflection. Her brother used to call it sun blink, though tonight there was no sun. Just rain and city glare bouncing off glass. But the angle was wrong. Too steady. Too precise. Her pulse began hammering. Ethan's driver appeared beside the table holding an umbrella and checking his watch for the 3rd time in under a minute. Ethan finally reached for the back of his chair like he was about to stand. Naomi didn't think. She moved. The tray slipped from her hand first. Crystal exploded across the marble floor as heads turned sharply toward the noise. Before anyone could react, Naomi lunged forward and grabbed Ethan Kong by the tie, yanking him downward with enough force to spill dark wine across the front of his suit. Gasps erupted across the restaurant. One woman screamed. Ethan's chair scraped violently across the floor as 2 bodyguards surged forward instantly, hands reaching beneath their jackets. "What the hell?" Marco shouted. Then the window behind Ethan shattered with a deafening crack. Glass burst inward across the empty chair where Ethan's head had been less than a second earlier. Silence swallowed the room. Naomi's fingers still clutched Ethan Kang's tie as her breathing turned shallow and uneven. She leaned close enough to smell cedar cologne and rain on his jacket. "There's a sniper," she whispered shakily. "And your driver set you up." For 3 long seconds, nobody in the restaurant moved. The shattered wall of glass behind Ethan Kong groaned under the pressure of rain and cold wind pouring into the rooftop dining room while tiny crystal fragments glittered across the marble floor like ice. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat louder than the jazz music still playing awkwardly through the speakers. Then the bodyguards reacted. One of them grabbed Naomi so hard the champagne stain on Ethan's tie smeared across her fingers as she was ripped backward from the table. Another stepped directly in front of Ethan while speaking rapidly into the microphone hidden near his collar. Guests ducked beneath tables. Expensive chairs scraped violently against the floor. Somewhere near the bar, a woman cried softly into her phone. Naomi stumbled as the guard forced her arms behind her back. "I did not do anything," she gasped. "Listen to me." The shot came from across the avenue. "Shut up," the guard snapped. His voice carried the sharp edge of panic disguised as control. Ethan Kong had not moved. Even with rain blowing through the broken window and half the restaurant descending into chaos around him, he remained seated beside the ruined table, one hand resting against the stem of his untouched whiskey glass. His dark eyes settled slowly on Naomi with terrifying calm. There was no gratitude in that expression. No relief. Only calculation. Naomi suddenly understood why men feared him. He looked at people the way chess players looked at pieces before sacrifice. "Search the building opposite us," Ethan said quietly. He did not raise his voice, but everyone obeyed instantly. "Lock every exit. Nobody leaves this floor." His driver stepped forward from near the elevators, rain droplets still clinging to the shoulders of his black coat. "Sir, the car is ready downstairs," he said quickly. "We should move now before." "No," Ethan's answer came soft as silk. The driver froze. Naomi noticed it immediately. The slight twitch in the man's jaw. The way his eyes flicked toward the service hallway for less than a second. Fear. Real fear. Ethan noticed too. Naomi could tell from the subtle shift in his expression. Barely visible. "But there. You," Ethan said at last, turning toward Naomi. "Look at me." The bodyguard loosened his grip just enough for her to straighten. Naomi swallowed hard and lifted her eyes. Up close, Ethan Kong looked even colder than he had from across the restaurant. Rain reflected in his dark irises while broken glass sparkled behind him like scattered diamonds. "How did you know?" he asked. Naomi's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to apologize, to disappear back into the invisible world where waitresses survived by minding their business. But another instinct, older and sharper, refused to let her back down now. "Because your driver checked his watch 4 times in 2 minutes, she said carefully. "Because he changed the drop-off route before you arrived. And because nobody stands near open glass after spotting scope reflection unless they want to die." Silence settled heavily between them. One of the guards frowned. "Scope reflection?" Naomi nodded slowly. "My brother was Army reconnaissance," she said. "He taught me what sniper positioning looks like." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her face with unnerving focus. "Interesting coincidence," he murmured. "A waitress who recognizes military surveillance patterns." Naomi's stomach dropped. She understood the accusation instantly. In his world, nobody trusted coincidence. Ethan stood then, slow and controlled, wine still staining the front of his charcoal suit. The entire restaurant seemed to tense as he approached her. He stopped inches away, close enough that Naomi could smell rainwater and smoke clinging faintly to his jacket. "Tell me something, Naomi Brooks," he said softly. "Did you save my life tonight?" His eyes hardened. "Or are you the reason somebody tried to take it?" Naomi felt every eye in the restaurant settle on her at once. Fear moved differently in rooms filled with wealthy people. It was quieter. Colder. Nobody screamed anymore. They simply watched her the way people watched storms through reinforced glass, grateful the danger had landed on someone else first. Ethan Kong remained standing directly in front of her, rain-soaked city lights framing his silhouette through the shattered wall behind him. The bodyguard gripping Naomi's arm tightened his hold slightly as if waiting for permission to drag her away. Ethan never looked at the guard. His attention stayed fixed on Naomi's face with unnerving patience. "Answer the question," he said softly. Naomi forced herself to breathe slowly. If I wanted you dead, she replied carefully, I would not have pulled you out of the shot. One of the guards scoffed under his breath. Or maybe she pulled him because she knew exactly when it was coming. The accusation landed hard because it sounded reasonable. Naomi could feel suspicion thickening around her like smoke. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Continue, he said. Naomi glanced toward the broken window. Across the avenue, the neighboring tower stood dark except for scattered office lights glowing against the rain. Somewhere up there, someone had watched this room through a scope. Someone had known Ethan Kang's exact seat. The shooter had your timing, Naomi said quietly. That means they had your route. Ethan's expression did not change, but his driver shifted near the elevators again. Tiny movement. Easy to miss. Naomi noticed anyway. So did Ethan. You keep looking at my driver, Ethan observed. Why? Naomi hesitated. Saying the wrong thing inside a room like this could ruin her life faster than any bullet. But the memory already clawed its way back into her mind before she could stop it. Texas heat. Dry wind. Her brother Marcus sitting on the hood of his truck outside their apartment complex 8 years ago, teaching her how to spot reflections through binoculars while laughing at how impatient she was. Snipers do not just hide, he used to tell her. They wait for patterns. Drivers, routes, routines. Betrayal always starts with somebody close. Marcus Brooks came home from Afghanistan quieter than before. Not broken. Just heavier somehow. He never talked much about what happened overseas except once, late at night after too much bourbon and too little sleep. We lost good men because somebody sold coordinates, he had said while staring at nothing. Never ignore small behavior changes around scared people. Naomi swallowed hard and returned to the present. Your driver checked his watch too much, she said finally. He kept touching his phone before you arrived. Nervous people repeat movements. That proves nothing, the guard snapped. Ethan raised one finger slightly. Silence returned immediately. Rain hissed through the broken window while jazz music finally died somewhere overhead. Ethan stepped closer to Naomi until only inches separated them. Most people panic after hearing a shot, he murmured. You started analyzing behavior instead. Naomi held his gaze even though her knees felt weak. Because panic gets people killed. For the first time since she grabbed his tie, something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Not trust. Not warmth. Recognition. Like he suddenly understood she was speaking from experience instead of imagination. A guard approached quickly from the hallway, water dripping from his coat sleeves. The office building across the avenue is already locked down, he announced quietly. No sign of the shooter. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Of course not, he said. Naomi looked toward the driver again. This time she noticed something else. His right hand trembled slightly near his coat pocket. Tiny movement. Almost invisible. But frightened people always betrayed themselves in the details. Ethan noticed Naomi noticing it. The room went still again. Then Ethan spoke without taking his eyes off her. Bring the driver to the private lounge, he said calmly. And bring Miss Brooks with us. Naomi's stomach dropped. Ethan adjusted the wine-stained tie still hanging loose around his collar before speaking one final sentence that chilled the room more than the rain outside ever could. If she is lying, he said softly, I will know. The private lounge sat behind a set of dark walnut doors at the far end of the rooftop, hidden away from the panic still rippling through the restaurant outside. Inside, the room felt colder somehow. Quieter. Thick gray storm clouds pressed against the tall windows overlooking Manhattan while rain streaked down the glass in silver lines. A fireplace flickered softly beneath a massive oil painting, but the warmth never seemed to reach the people inside the room. Naomi stood near the entrance with her damp hands clasped tightly together, trying not to show how badly they trembled. Across from her, Ethan Kong removed his stained jacket slowly and draped it over the back of a leather chair without saying a word. His white dress shirt remained perfectly pressed despite the chaos from minutes earlier, except for the loosened tie still hanging unevenly around his collar where Naomi had grabbed it. Two bodyguards positioned themselves silently near the doors while Ethan's driver stood near the windows under the weight of 4 different suspicious stares. His name was Daniel Cho. Naomi remembered hearing it once from another employee downstairs months ago. He looked to be in his early 40s with careful hair, polished shoes, and the exhausted posture of a man who had spent years trying not to make mistakes around dangerous people. Tonight, though, something about him felt wrong. Too stiff. Too aware of his own breathing. Ethan poured himself a glass of water from the crystal decanter on the bar counter. The ice cubes clicked softly against the glass. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Start talking," Ethan said calmly without looking up. Daniel swallowed hard. "Sir, I do not know what she told you, but I would never." "You changed the route tonight," Ethan interrupted. Not angry. Not emotional. Somehow that made the room feel even more dangerous. Daniel blinked quickly. Traffic on Lexington was backed up because of construction. "You did not mention construction before we left the penthouse." Daniel hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely half a second. But Naomi saw it immediately. Ethan saw it too. The driver's hand drifted unconsciously toward his wristwatch again before stopping halfway. Same nervous movement. Same repeated pattern. Naomi suddenly understood something important. Daniel did not look like a criminal. He looked terrified. Ethan finally turned toward Naomi. "Explain exactly what you saw." Naomi took a slow breath. "When your car arrived downstairs," she said carefully, "Daniel checked his watch before opening your door. Then again in the elevator lobby. Then again when we seated you near the window." Daniel shook his head quickly. "That means nothing." Naomi ignored him. "People checking time during coordinated operations are usually waiting for confirmation." Ethan leaned slightly against the edge of the bar. "And what operation do you think this was?" Naomi glanced toward the rain-soaked skyline outside. One shooter to force movement. Another waiting for the evacuation route. Silence filled the room. One of the bodyguards exchanged a quick look with the other. Ethan's expression darkened almost invisibly. "You think tonight was designed to move me somewhere predictable," he said quietly. Naomi nodded once. The first shot missed too cleanly. Daniel let out a nervous laugh that sounded hollow in the quiet room. "This is insane. She is a waitress pretending to be military intelligence." Ethan's eyes shifted toward him slowly. "And yet she noticed your behavior before my own security team did." Daniel's face tightened. Rain hammered harder against the windows now, turning the city beyond the glass into blurred streaks of white and gold. Somewhere far below, police sirens echoed faintly through Manhattan traffic. Ethan stepped away from the bar and approached the windows with measured calm. His reflection stared back at him through the storm-dark glass. "Only 4 people knew tonight's exact seating arrangement," he said softly. "Me. My security chief. My assistant." He paused. Then looked directly at Daniel. "And you?" Daniel's breathing became shallow. Naomi saw it instantly. Fear spreading beneath composure like cracks beneath ice. Ethan noticed too. The room seemed to hold its breath all at once. Then Ethan spoke the words that made Naomi's stomach tighten. "Take his phone," he said quietly. One of the guards stepped forward immediately. Daniel backed away fast enough to knock into the leather chair behind him. "Sir, please," he said suddenly. "You do not understand." Ethan's face hardened. "Then help me understand." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the rain-covered windows. And for the first time that night, Naomi realized he was not afraid of Ethan Kong. He was afraid of someone else. The bodyguard removed Daniel Cho's phone slowly, like he expected the device itself to explode in his hands. Rain battered the windows harder now, thunder rolling low above Manhattan while the private lounge fell into suffocating silence. Ethan Kong remained perfectly still near the fireplace, one hand resting loosely in his pocket while the other held the untouched glass of water. Naomi realized something unsettling then. Ethan never raised his voice because he never needed to. Fear entered rooms before he did. Daniel's composure was unraveling by the second. Tiny beads of sweat formed near his temple despite the cool air conditioning inside the lounge. "Unlock it," Ethan said softly. Daniel hesitated. One of the guards stepped closer immediately. "Sir," Daniel whispered shakily, "please. You have known me 11 years. "Exactly," Ethan replied. "Which is why I am giving you the opportunity to tell me the truth before somebody else does it for you." Naomi watched Daniel's face carefully. Her brother used to say guilt always arrived before confession. Not in words. In the body. Tight shoulders. Dry lips. Eyes searching for exits that no longer existed. Daniel looked toward the rain-dark windows again. Then finally toward Ethan. "They have my son," he said quietly. The room froze. Even the guards stopped moving. Ethan's expression remained unreadable, but Naomi saw something shift behind his eyes. Daniel swallowed hard. 3 weeks ago my son disappeared after school in Queens. I thought it was random until they sent me photos." His voice cracked slightly before he forced it steady again. "They said if I did not cooperate, I would never see him again." Ethan said nothing. The silence pressed harder than shouting ever could. Daniel continued speaking quickly now, like fear had finally outrun loyalty. "I did not know there would be a shot tonight. They only told me to change the route and seat you near the windows. That is all, I swear." Naomi felt cold settle deep in her chest. Ethan slowly placed the water glass onto the marble counter beside him. "Who are they?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "I never saw faces. Only messages." One of the guards handed Ethan the unlocked phone. Ethan scrolled through the screen calmly while rainwater crawled down the windows behind him like silver veins. Naomi noticed his jaw tighten almost invisibly as he read. "Encrypted numbers," the guard muttered. "Burner accounts." Ethan stopped scrolling. A single message glowed against the screen. "Midnight. Parking structure across the avenue. Finish the route." Naomi's stomach tightened instantly. "Second location," she whispered. Ethan looked up sharply. "What?" Naomi pointed toward the phone. The rooftop attack was not the real setup. They expected evacuation afterward. Daniel nodded miserably. "The parking structure was where your backup vehicle was supposed to meet us." Silence crashed through the room again. Ethan turned slowly toward the rain-covered skyline outside the lounge windows. Manhattan shimmered beneath the storm like a city submerged underwater. Somewhere across the avenue, someone was still watching. Waiting. Naomi suddenly noticed movement reflected faintly through the glass. Not outside. Inside. One of the champagne buckets sitting near the bar mirrored a flash of light from above the neighboring parking garage. Sharp. Metallic. Familiar. Her pulse spiked instantly. "Down," she breathed. Ethan reacted before anyone else understood. He grabbed Naomi by the wrist and pulled her sharply toward the floor beside the marble bar counter just as another deafening crack echoed through the storm outside. Glass shattered high above the fireplace. Guests screamed somewhere beyond the lounge doors. One of the guards rushed toward the windows while another shielded Ethan instinctively. Naomi's breathing turned shallow against the carpet as Ethan's hand remained locked tightly around her wrist. Close now, she could hear his breathing for the first time all night. Controlled. Precise. but faster than before. Ethan looked toward the broken glass scattered across the fireplace stones, then back toward Naomi. The room fell silent except for the rain. "You saw it again," he said quietly. Naomi nodded once, still trying to steady her breathing. Ethan's grip loosened slightly but did not let go. For the first time since this nightmare began, the suspicion in his eyes had changed into something far more dangerous. Trust. The rooftop lounge no longer felt like part of a restaurant. It felt like the inside of a locked vault slowly filling with pressure. Rain slammed against the shattered windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere below the skyline, their faint blue lights flickering against the ceiling in restless waves. Naomi sat beside the marble bar trying to steady her breathing as broken glass sparkled around the fireplace like scattered ice. Across the room, Ethan Kong stood near the windows with one hand resting against his loosened tie, staring into the storm-dark city with the stillness of someone forcing himself to think instead of react. Daniel Cho remained seated under guard near the leather sofa, shoulders slumped beneath years of exhaustion that suddenly showed all at once. "The second shooter knew the evacuation point," one of the guards said quietly while speaking into his earpiece. "Parking structure security footage is already wiped." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Just once. Naomi noticed because the movement felt strangely human coming from him. Until now he had seemed carved from the same marble and steel as the buildings around him. Untouchable. But betrayal changed powerful men differently than fear did. Fear sharpened them. Betrayal hollowed them out. 11 years, Ethan said softly without turning around. Nobody answered. Rainwater slid down the massive windows in silver rivers behind him. "Daniel drove me through riots in Brooklyn. Federal investigations. 3 separate ambushes." His voice remained calm, but Naomi could hear something heavier beneath it now. "I trusted him with routes even my own security chief did not know." Daniel lowered his head. "Sir, I never wanted this." Ethan finally turned toward him slowly. "But you still did it." Silence settled over the room again. Naomi looked away instinctively. Some moments felt too private to witness, even in dangerous places. Her brother used to say trust was the most expensive thing powerful people ever gave away because once it broke, they never replaced it the same way again. Ethan walked toward the bar and loosened his tie completely, pulling it free from his collar with controlled irritation before tossing it onto the marble counter beside Naomi. The deep red wine stain still marked the silk where her hands had grabbed it earlier. Naomi stared at the tie awkwardly, unsure whether to speak. Ethan reached for the crystal decanter again but stopped halfway. "Do you know what gets men like Daniel recruited?" he asked quietly. Naomi looked up. "Fear." Ethan gave a faint humorless smile. "Love." Daniel's eyes filled instantly with shame. "My son is 12 years old," he whispered. "They sent me pictures of him walking home from school." Ethan leaned both hands against the edge of the marble bar, staring down at the floor for a long moment. Naomi realized then that the room was seeing something almost nobody else ever witnessed. Ethan Kong uncertain. Not weak. Never weak. But wounded in a place bullets could never reach. "I built my entire life around predicting betrayal," he said softly. "And somehow I still missed the man standing beside me every day." Naomi studied him carefully. Beneath the expensive suit, the cold stare, the controlled voice, she suddenly saw exhaustion. Not from tonight. From years. Years of calculating exits. Watching hands. Distrusting silence. "You missed it because you cared about him," she said quietly before thinking better of it. One of the guards glanced at her sharply, surprised she dared interrupt him. But Ethan simply looked at her across the dimly lit lounge. Thunder rolled through Manhattan outside. "That sounds dangerously close to sympathy," he murmured. Naomi swallowed. "My brother said people do desperate things when somebody they love is threatened." Ethan's eyes darkened slightly at the mention of her brother again. Your brother sounds like he understood this world. Naomi looked toward the rain-covered skyline. He understood what fear turns people into. Ethan studied her face for several long seconds. Not as a suspect anymore. Not even as a waitress. Something had shifted between them during the chaos outside. A strange understanding neither of them fully trusted yet. Then one of the guards pressed a hand against his earpiece suddenly. "Sir," he said tensely. "We have movement downstairs." Black SUV approaching the service entrance. Daniel's face drained of color instantly. Ethan noticed. So did Naomi. The room fell silent again. Ethan slowly reached for the stain tie resting beside Naomi's hand. "Looks like whoever planned tonight is not finished yet," he said quietly. The atmosphere inside the private lounge changed the moment the bodyguard mentioned the black SUV downstairs. Fear moved through the room. Silently, like cold air slipping beneath a locked door. Daniel Cho looked physically sick now, his face pale beneath the soft amber lighting while rain continued hammering against the shattered windows behind him. Ethan Kong remained near the marble bar with the stain tie wrapped loosely around one hand, his expression unreadable again, but Naomi could feel the tension hardening beneath his calm like steel beneath velvet. One of the guards touched his earpiece. "Vehicle has no plates," he reported quietly. 3 occupants visible so far. Ethan nodded once. "Seal the elevators." "Already done." Naomi's pulse quickened. Whoever had organized tonight was escalating. That terrified her more than the sniper shots themselves. Planned operations were predictable. Desperate operations were not. Ethan turned toward Daniel slowly. "Did they give you a time?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Midnight." One of the guards checked his watch immediately. 11:53. Silence settled over the room like smoke. 7 minutes. Naomi glanced instinctively toward the rain-dark skyline outside. Her brother used to count time during dangerous moments because it gave panic structure. 7 minutes meant decisions. Mistakes. Pressure. Ethan loosened the cuffs of his dress shirt with deliberate calm while the guards repositioned near the doors. Naomi noticed his hands were perfectly steady again. Whatever moment of vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier was gone now, buried beneath years of survival instinct. "Sir," Daniel whispered suddenly, "please let me call them. Maybe I can fix this." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "You still think people like this negotiate?" Daniel lowered his eyes. Naomi could not stop thinking about the son. A 12-year-old boy somewhere in Queens caught inside a nightmare built by adults. "What if they only want confirmation?" she asked quietly. Ethan turned toward her. "Meaning?" Naomi hesitated. "If the rooftop attack failed, maybe the SUV is not here to finish anything. Maybe they just want to see if Daniel is still cooperating." One of the guards frowned. "You think they are watching the building?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Operations like this need eyes everywhere." Ethan studied her carefully again. Every time she spoke, he looked less surprised by her instincts and more unsettled by them. "You notice too much for a waitress," he murmured. Naomi looked away briefly. "People underestimate service workers," she said softly. "That is why we hear everything." Thunder rolled across Manhattan again. The lights flickered once overhead before stabilizing. Then Daniel's phone buzzed loudly inside the guard's hand. Every person in the room froze instantly. The guard looked toward Ethan for permission before holding up the screen. "Unknown number." Ethan's face hardened. "Answer it," he said quietly. Daniel's hands shook as the phone was placed against his ear. The entire lounge went silent except for rain and distant sirens below the skyline. Hello?" Daniel whispered. A distorted voice answered through the speaker, calm and mechanical. "Bring Kong downstairs alone." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Please," he whispered into the phone. "My son. I did everything you asked." The voice remained emotionless. Midnight. Service entrance. Alone. The call disconnected. Nobody moved for several seconds afterward. Naomi felt cold settle into her stomach. Whoever controlled this operation sounded terrifyingly patient. Ethan stepped toward the rain-covered windows again, staring down at the glowing streets far below. Midnight approached silently around him. "They still think they control the board," he murmured. Then he turned toward Naomi unexpectedly. "Do you trust your instincts?" Naomi blinked. "Usually." Ethan nodded once. "Good." He handed her the wine-stained tie from the bar counter. Naomi stared at it in confusion. "Why?" she asked quietly. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his shirt with measured calm. "Because if tonight gets worse," he said softly, "I want at least one honest person in this room holding on to something real." Naomi looked down at the tie in her hands while thunder shook the windows again. For reasons she could not explain, the gesture unsettled her more than the gunshots had. Then one of the guards spoke sharply into his earpiece. "Movement at the service elevators." Ethan's eyes darkened. Instantly. "Midnight," he said quietly. "Right on time." The service elevator bell echoed through the private lounge as thunder shook Manhattan outside, and every person in the room reacted instantly, guard straightening, Daniel Cho frozen, Ethan Kong sharpening into deadly focus. Naomi still held the wine-stained tie, unaware of it trembling in her hands. The elevator doors opened, empty. Silence hit harder than any gunshot. Naomi stepped forward first, realizing something wrong. If attackers wanted Ethan dead, they would never announce themselves. "It's a distraction," she said. Ethan's gaze hardened. "Then where is Vincent?" A guard checked his earpiece, no response. Instantly, the room shifted into crisis. Ethan moved with controlled speed toward the security office while Naomi followed despite instinct telling her to run. Inside, monitors flickered, systems failing, feeds looping, the room abandoned. Vincent was gone. Then a live feed appeared, the service entrance below. A black SUV idling in rain. A small boy stepped out alone with an umbrella. Daniel whispered in shock, "My son." The trap was no longer abstract, it was personal. Ethan descended to the garage with Naomi and guards behind him. Rain poured across concrete as Daniel rushed to his son, collapsing in relief. But Ethan did not move immediately. He studied the scene, sensing the deeper manipulation. The SUV was too clean. Too intentional. Guards reported Vincent's abandoned vehicle nearby. Ethan understood first, he is already gone. When asked to continue pursuit, he said calmly, "Tonight is over." Shock rippled through the team. Ethan stepped into the rain, watching Daniel hold his child. Instead of punishment, he ordered him home. Naomi observed silently as exhaustion replaced war in Ethan's expression. Before leaving, he looked at the ruined tie in her hand. "Keep it," he said softly. "It reminded me who was trying to save me." In that moment, beneath the storm, power meant nothing compared to truth.